Today, Israel laid to rest 3 members of the Bibas family. Shiri Bibas, just 32 years old, originally from Argentina and Germany, and her 2 sons, Ariel, only 4 years old, and Kfir, just 10 months old. Their funeral marks not only a personal tragedy, but for Israel, this is a national moment of mourning and reflection. On October 7th, they were taken from near Oz by Hamas in what can only be described as a brutal act of terror. We saw them alive later on CCTV footage in Gaza, Shiri holding her children with that terrified look that has gone into the hearts of people around the world. Then, later, Hamas claimed they'd been killed by the IDF. However, forensic evidence has since revealed the horrific truth. The Bibas, Shiri, Kfir, and Ariel were brutally murdered by Hamas in cold blood. On February 20th, Hamas returned the bodies of the 2 children, but not Shiri. Instead, Hamas sent Israel the body of an unidentified Gazan woman. The next day, they exchanged the body for that of Shiri Bibas. Today, the Bibas family, as their father looked on, Shiri, Kfir, and Ariel were laid to rest in the Zohar community near the Gaza envelope in a private funeral for family. No politicians and no press. As the casket, the single casket containing the mother and her 2 children, traveled from Rishon LeZion down south, thousands of Israelis lined the road as they made their final journey. In a poignant tribute, the President of Israel's house and the Knesset were illuminated in orange, in memory, of course, of Ariel and Kfir's red hair. But now the question remains, what comes next? Phase 1 of the hostage deal is now nearing an end. Throughout this deal, 34 hostages have been returned to Israel, including 4 dead hostages. In return, Hamas has received close to 2,000 terrorists, 300 of whom were serving life sentences for murder. In the end, Israel, for reasons that have not yet been explained, withdrew from the Netzarim corridor. However, the technology was not deployed. As a result, as I'm speaking with you, thousands of Hamas fighters have blended in with the Gazan civilians, and now thousands of them have migrated to northern Gaza. They've rebuilt their combat units, they've rearmed, they've strengthened, and they've rebuilt the underground tunnels that were not destroyed. New commanders have been reappointed. Hamas has also managed to recruit thousands of additional fighters. How are they paying them? With the money that they are receiving from stealing humanitarian aid and selling it openly in Hamas-run grocery stores. You can see this online. The grocery stores are packed with international aid, with fruits and vegetables, with meat and fish. All the money goes into the coffers of Hamas. The estimates are that Hamas has profited hundreds of millions of dollars from stealing the aid and reselling it since the beginning of the war. Meanwhile, the IDF remains in a buffer zone inside Gaza. We're holding strategic positions, including the Philadelphia corridor. Hamas is preparing for war. They're relaying roadside bombs, they're setting ambushes, all in preparation for a potential return of Israeli troops to Gaza to continue the war to destroy them once and for all. And now, we have a defining choice. Does Israel move to phase 2 of the Gaza deal? This is what's on everybody's mind. Phase 2 calls for Hamas to release all of the hostages, for Israel to withdraw completely from Gaza, and for a permanent ceasefire. Just so we understand that this would leave Hamas and their entities in existence in charge of the Gaza Strip unless they are destroyed. Some argue that Gaza is not going anywhere, that Israel's priority must be bringing our people home, and that the war can resume later. Others, on the other side, are warning that every free terrorist and every day of Hamas regrouping increases the risk to Israel. Waiting could cost Israeli lives. There is a reality that I believe we must face. Hamas is many things. They're barbaric, they're cruel, even demonic. But there's one thing they are not. Unfortunately, Hamas is not stupid. They knew exactly what they were doing on October 7th. They studied Israel's weaknesses and they exploited them. They counted on 2 things to protect them from total annihilation: international pressure on the one hand, and protection from the Israeli hostages on the other. Hamas banked on international pressure stopping Israel, and for a time it worked. U.S. pressure on Israel to delay entering key areas in Gaza, such as Gaza City, Rafah, and Khan Yunis, caused Israel to lose the element of surprise. Hamas used this time to escape with their terrorists and with Israeli hostages. We now know from the hostages that have been released over the last month that they were moved from Gazan home to Gazan home across the strip. As soon as Israel left an area, they were then put in homes in that area, shifted like pieces on a chessboard. At one point, the U.S. made a decision to withhold ordnance, including crucial bombs and artillery. This impaired Israel's ability to fight. However, at no point in time did Israel completely stop fighting Hamas, as Hamas had predicted. At a high point of U.S. pressure on Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu even told the Biden administration that Israel will fight with our fingernails if we have to. Hamas's first strategy of Israel stopping under international pressure is now even more unlikely. With Trump back in the White House, the shells and the other withheld ordnance are finally on their way. And the administration has openly said it will not hold Israel back. This brings us to Hamas's second strategy, the hostages. They've used them as a shield against Israeli military action. They know that each hostage represents a bargaining chip that stalls Israel's advance. Many in Israel have said publicly that we'll complete the deal, complete the second phase, and then we'll eliminate Hamas. However, does anyone believe that Hamas doesn't hear these words? They're not stupid. Why would they ever willingly give up their last bargaining chip? They know that as soon as they conclude a deal and we have all of our hostages back home, nothing stops us from going back into Gaza and destroying them. This brings us to a painful truth, but one that we cannot turn away from. Hamas, unfortunately, will most likely never release all of our hostages. Every day we wait, Hamas grows stronger. Every terrorist that we release emboldens them. And make no mistake, every terror organization around the world is learning a single lesson. Take a hostage and you can hold an entire nation hostage. I chose today, as we mourn the Bibas family, as the day that we must acknowledge what Hamas is doing. They are banking on our grief, and they are banking on our grief at this moment, and we are grieving as we bury and we watch that casket go around Israel. They are using our pain against us, and we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we going to allow them to do this? There's another factor at play, and it must be mentioned. With President Trump's return to the White House, the conversation is shifting. This means two things. First, a new potential outcome for Gazans by Trump's Gaza deal, which offers them opportunities to move and start new lives while the Gaza Strip is rebuilt as a Riviera of the Middle East. I'll be discussing this with U.S. national security expert Mike Doran in the coming days on the podcast. And there's a lot to discuss and a lot to unpack. Second, it means focusing on the head of the octopus, Iran. The mastermind behind all of this, as Israel and the U.S. know, is Iran. While it is crucial to cut off the tentacles, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, the head of terror, in fact, the head of global terror, the largest state funder of terror in the world, is Iran. All of these entities are coordinated and funded by Iran. With President Trump in the White House, public reports have said that just in the last few hours, 2 B-52 planes recently arrived in the Middle East. Clearly, the options for dealing with Iran have been expanded. I'll be talking about this in an upcoming podcast as well, as we go inside the Iranian mind with Harold Rode, a professor and an expert on Persia and Iran. Now the question leaves us, as we began, where do we go from here? The choices before us are absolutely brutal. The pain, as we feel it today especially, is unimaginable. But we have to see reality for what it is, not what we wish it to be. Hamas is not going to surrender, and they are not going to release all of our people. And if we continue to let them dictate the battlefield, one thing is for sure, Hamas will only grow stronger. Israel has a very big decision to make. Do we pause for a deal that may never come, or do we act now before the price becomes even greater? The Bibas family's funeral reminds us why we must fight. It is not just about today. It is also about ensuring that no mother, no father, and no child is ever taken from their home again. Thank you for listening to the Surest podcast. My name is Doron Spielman. We will continue to bring you the updates as they unfold.